Hey everybody, Doug here. I've got kind of a fun video for you here today. I'm going to be showing you how to do network recording from the HyperDeck Studio line of video recorders from Blackmagic Design. This is a feature that was actually just fairly recently added to the Studio lineup. It's been available in a couple other models in the past, but with the firmware update that came out a few weeks ago, 8.4, just before NAB, we can now do this on the HyperDeck Studio line of devices. That includes the HyperDeck Studio HD Mini, the HyperDeck Studio HD Plus, the HyperDeck Studio HD Pro, and the HyperDeck Studio 4K Pro, and that is added on top of the HyperDeck Shuttle that was the feature was available on before as well. Now, I should mention that you don't necessarily have to have any additional hardware beyond what you already have in order to do this. As long as you got a computer that's got some storage and you can plug it into a network, you can actually pull this off. Although Blackmagic has an easier way, and I'm going to be demonstrating that as well. So they've got some cloud storage devices. They call them cloud, but they're actually for your local network. You can use those and record directly to those. It's super simple to do, and I'll be showing how to do that first, and then I will be getting into how to record directly to a computer. So this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy video, so you might want to grab a snack, sit down in a comfortable seat, grab a drink, and prepare for a little bit of instruction here on how to make this happen. Alright, so the first thing we actually need to do in order to get this to work is we need to make sure we've got the latest firmware on the HyperDecks themselves. This is a feature that's only been recently made available, and if you haven't updated your HyperDeck in a while, you're going to have to do that in order for this feature to actually become available. So what we're going to do here, let me move this a little more centered here on the screen. We want to go to the Blackmagic Design website, and then from there we're going to click on Support, and then we're going to click on Duplication, Disk Recorders, and Storage. And from there we want to download the HyperDeck 8.4 update. Let me actually zoom in just a little bit so it's a little easier to see. So you'll go ahead and download that, run it on either Windows or Mac OS. Make sure your HyperDeck is plugged into the network, with the same network as your computer, or plug it in with the USB-C cable, either one. Launch the software, and then when you click on the device and go to the properties, it will actually prompt you to install the update. It's easy to do, only takes a few minutes, but that is a required step that we have to take before we're able to do any of the rest of the stuff that I'm going to be showing here in the video. Now, if you take a look here in front of me, you notice that there are two of the HyperDeck Studio HD Plus model recorders in front of me on my desk, and they're both currently recording. But a sharp eye among you will probably notice that there are no SD cards in here, and if I go to my overhead shot, you'll notice that there are no discs plugged into the external disc USB-C port on the back. And that is because these are recording to a cloud device, one of the Blackmagic cloud devices, and I will pull that out and show you what that looks like. Here is the Blackmagic Cloud Pod. This is the cheapest of the products that are in the Blackmagic Cloud product lineup. This is the one where you supply your own disk. So they've got several other models that have built-in storage. This one you supply your own, and you can see here I've got a USB-C drive plugged into there. There are actually two USB-C ports on the back where you can hook up two different disk drives. I'm using one here that I built myself. I find that that's going to give you the best performance for the money, and I'll have some links to some available options here popping up throughout the course of this video. But basically you're supplying your own storage here for any of the HyperDecks on your network that you want to be able to record. And this doesn't just provide a destination for recording, this actually provides network storage that your computer can access as well. So you can actually be recording and pulling the footage off of this unit at the same time, simultaneously. So it can be very useful if you need to get an edit out right away. You know, you've got a live event and you need to be able to produce a finished recorded version of something. So you're able to load it right into your video editor and start editing right away. Similarly, if we want to go directly to a computer storage, we can do that. I'll have that demonstration here in a little bit. But connection of this device is actually very simple. You got power, you've got an Ethernet connection, you've got two USB-C connections for storage for disks, and then you have an HDMI connection. And just very briefly show you what that HDMI connection does. So this allows you to see what's going on with this device. You're able to monitor what's happening and you see what's going on with recording and whatnot visually through that HDMI output. So somewhat useful. It's kind of interesting. It's a nice looking display anyway. So if you want to make your setup look a little more high tech, you can throw that up there and kind of see what's going on. It also gives you a visual to let you know, hey, this disk is filling up or whatever. So anyway, kind of interesting there. All right, now back to the device itself. I want to mention that the network connection on here is actually 10 gigabit, and that can be kind of important if you're wanting to record or play back multiple streams simultaneously, especially if you're doing it in a high resolution format, such as ProRes or DNX HD or DNX HR. So those particular codecs, especially if you're recording high frame rate or in 4K, can produce a lot of video. And if you have more than one or two devices that are trying to record your network device, that can very likely produce more data than a single 1 gigabit network connection can handle. And that's why they put a 10 gigabit connection on there as well. Now, if you're recording in H.264 or H.265 and the recorders that support that, then your bitrate is going to be quite a bit lower, and you might be able to get away with a handful of streams on a single 1 gigabit connection going into the device. But something you got to be aware of if you're going to be trying to do high bandwidth, high resolution, high frame rate recordings, whatever, from the HyperDecks into the cloud store, you're probably going to want to make sure that you're plugging that into a network switch that has a 10 gigabit port. Similarly, if you've got multiple devices that are going to be recording, you want to make sure that nowhere throughout the signal chain are all the signals traveling through a single Ethernet cable. So here I've got these cables running directly into the switch, my main switch. It's not going through an auxiliary switch to get there, just because I want to make sure that I always have enough bandwidth and it's not being shared between multiple devices. With the Cloud Pod plugged into the network or whatever Blackmagic Cloud device you're using, we need to install some software in order to get it set up and kind of monitor and make sure everything's configured the way that we want it. So what we need to do is we need to go to the Blackmagic website to download that software. So first thing we want to do is we want to go to blackmagicdesign.com, and then we're going to click on the support link up here. And then from there, we want to go to the network storage option that's here. And then we can scroll down and see that the latest software is there available under latest downloads. So I've already got this Blackmagic Cloud Store 1.3 software installed. So I'm going to launch that here in a second. But this software does make changes to a lot of different files on your computer because it does interact with your file system a little bit. So make sure that you're installing this at a time when you're able to safely reboot your computer, because very often it's going to require that in order to complete the full installation process. Now, since I've got it installed, I'm just going to go ahead and launch it, and so that's Blackmagic Cloud Store Setup here. I've got that right in my Start menu, and that's going to come up. It's going to detect that, hey, there's the Blackmagic Cloud Pod on my network, and then from there we can kind of go into the properties here and see if there's anything that we need to configure. So first of all, we can set a name if we want to. It's not required, but if you have multiple, it's certainly nice to do that in order to make sure that you can identify which device is which. And then we've got down here a place to set the IP configuration for the IP address on the network, and that's how you're going to be able to find this device when you go to share it from a computer, or be able to talk to it from a computer. So in addition to that, we also have the ability to sync files up to the real cloud. So you can sync to the Blackmagic Cloud Sync service. You can sync your files up to Dropbox Sync. You can also sync to Google Drive Sync. I'm not going to go into that here. But it's a nice workflow if somebody offsite needs to get access to the files, and you need to be able to get those to them very easily. The Cloud Pod or other cloud storage device from Blackmagic is able to automatically upload those to those accounts. For what we're going to be doing here today, we won't be using that feature. And the other thing is, I just want to go over here into storage and make sure that the enable read-only is not checked. Now, while I'm in here, I just want to very briefly mention that there's a link right here on this page in order to allow you to access the files that are on your device, your cloud device, from your computer. So all we have to do is come down here and click Show in File Explorer, and it's going to pop up a window here in a second. There we go, and we have the one file share on here called Media. That's the drive that I've got plugged in there. And if it prompts you for a username and password, just use the word guest for both. That's what it's expecting, unless you've explicitly changed that. So anyway, so there it is. And if I double click on that, you'll be able to see the files that are on this device. And if I sort by date here, you can see that, bingo, there are, well, these anyway. These files right here are files that I recorded from these HyperDecks sitting right here in front of me just a moment ago. You can see that those files are right there, and if I want to watch the one, I can literally just double click it, and it will bring up whatever media player you happen to have installed and configured to view those files, and there you go. So there it's playing the files directly off that network storage. I don't even have to copy those files over to the computer. So okay, so with the cloud pods set up and on the network, we can now go to the HyperDecks themselves and set those up and tell them that we want to do recording or playback from the cloud device. So we'll take a look at that. Okay, so I'm going to leave these plugged in. It's going to make moving this around a little bit awkward, but here we go. So again, two HyperDeck Studio HD Pro models here in the rack. And I'm going to want to configure these in order to send the recordings to my CloudPod device. So in order to do that, we want to go into the menu first of all, and we start on the record menu. But what we need to do is we need to rotate the wheel to go over here to storage, and then go ahead and press set. And you can see I've already got set to communicate with that media directory on my network. But the first time I set that up, though, I have to scroll down here and go to this set network location option. So I'll go ahead and click on set with that. And it sees there's the Blackmagic Cloud Pod right there on the network. They set again. It's asking me which drive I want to go to, so I'm using a drive called Media. I hit set, and then it gives me a list of folders that are on that drive. But I want to go directly to the main directory on there, so I'm just going to choose set this location, and that will select that main drive on that particular USB drive. Okay, with that, it should automatically select that as the active media, but if not, you can double check and make sure you scroll all the way to the top and look at the active media option and click on set, and you'll see that the net option is in there. And you click set again to select that. You can also do this in conjunction with an SD card or USB drive in the back. You can only record to one or other at a time, but if you wanted to have both available, and for example, spill from one to the other when it fills up, you can certainly do that. You just make sure that you've got each of those devices connected and formatted just like you would normally for local recording. And at that point, your network storage just becomes one additional destination or source for playback, either one, automatically. So with that all set, I'm just going to hit the menu button here a couple times to exit all the way out. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit the record button, and bingo, there we go. We're recording to the CloudPod over the network. I didn't have to enter any IP addresses or anything. It all just sort of finds each other and works. Now again, be sure you kind of keep an eye out for bandwidth limitations. If you're recording to a high bandwidth codec with a high resolution, high frame rate, whatever, just keep an eye on it and make sure that your network is able to keep up. Network and the SSD that you're using or whatever has enough bandwidth in order to keep up with all the data that is going from the recorders to the drives. So I would advise practicing this a few times before you actually use it for a live production, and always make sure you've got another backup plan on top of that as well. So anyway, it's pretty cool that you're able to do that, and it gives you some flexibility that we haven't had in the past. All right, so with that, let's talk a little bit more about how to have these recordings go not to a CloudPod, but to a folder or directory on your computer directly. So you don't have to go through a cloud storage device. You don't have to buy a cloud storage device, whatever. You just go to a directory you've already got on your computer. And it's actually fairly easy to set up, but there's no user interface for this, and so we kind of have to drop into some command line options in order to get this configured. So none of this is hard. If this seems a little bit intimidating, just bear with me. You'll get it. It's not really that bad, and we'll walk through this step by step. Okay, so as mentioned, you do have to have a version of the Hyperdeck software, which is version 8.4 or later, and this only works on the current line of HyperDeck products, HyperDeck Studio, HyperDeck Shuttle, and HyperDeck Extreme products. The older ones, such as the HyperDeck Studio Mini, that came out in 2017, I believe it was, does not have this capability. It has not been updated to include it. So make sure you're running a relatively recent version of this hardware in order to make this work. On top of that, make sure you've got that HyperDeck Studio software 8.4 installed both on your computer and on the devices before we can configure this and get it set up and working. All right, okay, so let's actually just kind of dive in a little bit here, and let's talk through what it requires in order to make this work. So now, I don't want to get too technical with this, but I do want to mention that the protocol that's used to do this file sharing between the HyperDecks and the computer or other NAS storage actually, is SMB, or Samba is also known as well. It's a protocol that's built into Windows for sharing files over a network, and it's also supported by Mac and Linux as well. So you don't have to have a Windows machine to do this. I will be demonstrating this on a Windows machine though, because that does seem to be the majority of the people that are out there. The instructions for the Mac are very similar. You just have to alter the way you create the file share and the user that is configured for that file share. First thing we need to do is we need to select where on our computer we're going to want these files. So in my case, I am going to go to one of my SSDs that I have set up just for video recording. That's its whole purpose. In my case, that is drive F. So I'm going to double click on drive F, and I have a HyperDeck directory here, but just for the sake of completeness, I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and I'm going to create it from scratch. So I want to store all of my recordings in a directory as mentioned called HyperDeck. So I'm going to right click on in my folder here and say new folder, and I'm going to call that HyperDeck. And so that's where all of my recordings are going to go. And we're going to be telling the HyperDeck Studio product how to find that here in a little bit, but there's a few other steps we need to go through in order to make this accessible to the HyperDeck. We have some security things that we have to deal with as well. So I'm not necessarily going to get into every single security thing that needs to be done, but I'll kind of highlight some of those as we go, and you'll be able to find other tutorials or videos online with configuring some of those aspects of making this work. Now, after we've got a directory set up for our files, we need to create a user account on the computer for the HyperDeck to use in order to access that directory. So there is a username and password that's used to make all this happen, and we're going to set our own here in just a moment. It can technically use a guest account, but that's really not a great idea from a security point of view. You don't want to leave a guest network open for anybody to use. Those things can get discovered very quickly by bots and malware and all sorts of stuff, or any sort of devious individual who's snooping around. They can find those very easily. So you probably do want to set up a username and password explicitly for this purpose. Definitely don't want to use the existing username you have on your computer, because you're going to be typing the password in plain text, and anybody who wants to see what it is can pretty easily get in and see how that's been set up. So definitely want to go with something that's unique to just this setup and isn't used for anything else. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to add that user account into Windows. There is a place in settings in Windows in order to configure all this, but Microsoft has made that so convoluted at this point, and it keeps changing. So I'm going to show you an easier way to do this. It's a lot more straightforward than it is with the way that Windows has built in. Now, this works on any version of Windows from forever, so you don't necessarily have to have the Pro Edition, or it doesn't have to be Windows 10 or newer. It works on pretty much anything. So if you got an old junky computer laying around that you want to use for this, as long as it's got enough available bandwidth for your network connection and the disk that you're recording to, it's going to work just fine. Okay? All right, so the way we're going to do this, we're going to drop into the command prompt and type in a few commands. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on the Start menu, and I'm going to start typing the word command prompt. All right, that popping up there, but I'm not going to just select it. What I need to do is I need to right-click on that and then choose Run as Administrator. In order to add a username to your computer, you need to have admin rights, and so that's why we need to select that. Okay, so there it is. It pops up, and we've got that set up and ready to go. All right, the command that we need to enter into the command prompt in order to create that user account is called netuser. So spell that out. And then we want to add a new user, and so we do a /add, ADD, and then a space, and then we're going to give it a username. So we're going to call this username HyperDeck, and then we give it a password. Just for simplicity, I'm going to use a really bad password. Do not do this, and I will be deleting this as soon as I shoot the video, but I'm just going to say password 1 with a capital P. Okay, with that, I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter, and there it is. It says the command completed successfully. And just so you know, if you ever want to delete that, the command to do so, I'm not going to complete this, but it's netuser/delete, and then the username. You don't have to enter the password on the delete command. All right, so with that, we actually have the user account that we need. It was really that easy. So from here, we need to grant permission to that user in order to save video files in the folder we created a minute ago. So we're going to go back over to that, and then I'm going to right click on that folder, and I'm going to go and say properties. And in order to get to this, you might need to enable advanced file sharing on your computer, but again, I'm not going to necessarily go through those steps here in order to show you how to do that. Okay, so we want to go over to the sharing tab on here, and then we're going to want to click on the advanced sharing button. What we need to do here is we need to click on share this folder, and then it needs a name. It defaults to the name of the folder, and I'm fine with that, so we're just going to go ahead and leave that as is. The other thing we need to do is we need to click on the permissions button here, and we need to basically tie that user account that we just created a minute ago with this folder. So it comes up in here, and I don't want to share this with everyone, so I want to go ahead and click on remove with that highlighted, and it's basically saying no users have been configured. So I'm going to click on add. I'm going to use that user account that I created a little while ago, so I'm going to type in that username. So in this case it's HyperDeck, and I'm going to say OK, and it's going to verify yes, that user does exist. And the other thing we need to do is we need to grant permission to change files, which is basically what you need in order to do recording to this directory. So I'm going to check the change box under the allow column, and then I'm going to click OK once, twice, and then click on close. And now that folder is set up and it's ready to go. Now, as mentioned, you might need to play with some of the other settings on your computer, particularly things like your firewall, in order to make sure that it's accessible out to the network. So without getting into too much detail, you want to make sure that your network type is set to private, and then you want to make sure that you've got file and print sharing features turned on inside of the firewall settings for the private network. So with the folder and the username set up and configured, there's only a couple of things left that we need to do, and it's pretty straightforward. But I need to make mention that the piece of software that you need in order to do this next step, it's included with Windows, but it's not installed by default. So we're going to need to install that really quick, and it's actually really easy to do. So I'm going to click on my Start button here, and I'm going to type in Windows Features. And it's going to have this option in here that says Turn Windows Features On or Off. I'm going to click on that, and that will bring up this little window here. And I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, and then we want to find this one that's called Telnet Client, and check that box, and then say OK. It'll only take a few seconds to install that, but we're going to need that in order to communicate with the HyperDeck. It's unfortunate that Windows no longer turns that on by default, because it's incredibly useful, particularly when we need to talk to network devices, which is what we're doing here. Okay, with that installed, we're going to have to issue some commands to the HyperDeck. And I'll show you what those are here in just a moment. But I want to make mention that the HyperDecks are not designed for direct interaction with users in this way. And so I'm going to make a recommendation that we actually use something like Notepad or TextEdit on the Mac or whatever in order to assemble these commands, so that when we go to send them to the HyperDeck, that they can be pasted in without the fear of any sort of typos. So the problem is, like when you're typing the commands directly to the HyperDeck, if you make a mistake, you can't backspace over it. So it's beneficial to do it ahead of time in something like Notepad. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open a copy of Notepad here, and I'm going to show you the commands that are actually needed to do this. The HyperDecks have a very extensive list of commands, and if you want to see a reference for what those are, you can go to the HyperDeck manual, and it's in the developer section. You can see that there's actually quite a few of them here. And the command that we're going to be using here is NAS, and for NAS. And that's Network Attached Storage. In particular, we're going to be using NAS Add and NAS Select commands. So the format for those is here in the manual. Let me blow that up just a little bit. There we go. So the format for those is here in the manual, but I'm going to walk you through it as well. All right, so I'm going to go back to the copy of Notepad that I opened just a moment ago. And we need to add the commands here in order to specify this computer as where we want to save those files. So the first command we're going to want to enter here is actually NAS add, so NAS space ADD, and then colon, and the colons are important here. We need to have those. The HyperDeck requires you to have the colons on the end of any commands, or part of any of the commands that need to be grouped together. So we're going to do the NAS add colon, and let me blow this up a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. Can I do that? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the command we need is NAS add, and then this is telling it where we're going to be, where we want to store those files. Okay, so the next thing we need is we need the URL, which is Uniform Resource Locator, which is basically this is the network location on the network or internet where the files need to go. So it's URL colon space SMB colon 2/, and then here is where we need the IP address of the computer that we're going to be sharing or going to be putting this on. I'm not sure if computer name is supposed to work or not. I didn't have much luck with that, so I'm doing directly computer with IP address for this particular computer. If you're not sure the IP address of your computer, what we can do is we can go back to that command prompt we used a moment ago, and we can type in the command ipconfig and then press enter. and find, there we go. So in my case, it's my network adapter is something I call trailer LAN, but the IP address that we want to use here is 10.1.8.81. And so what I'm going to do is go back over here into this. Let me minimize this to reduce some clutter. There we go. And so it's SMB:// and then the IP address of the computer that we want to save this on. So I'm going to go 10.1.8.81, and then we want a slash, and then we want to add the name of that network share that we created a while ago. So it's going to be a little bit confusing because I use the same HyperDeck name for the file share, for the folder, and for the username, but I'll try and specify which is which as we go. So for right here, we're specifying the name of the file share. So when we went to the advanced sharing and it had that box up top for the name for the share, that's what we're looking for right here. So we're going to say HyperDeck, and that's all we need for that. And then so we hit enter, and then we're going to go to the next line here. So it's username, colon, and then it's going to be the name of that user that we created. So in this case, that's HyperDeck as well. And then the next line we want is password, colon, space, and then the password we set up. So in my case, uppercase P for on password, and then the number 1. The other thing we want to do is we want to create another command in here to basically tell the HyperDeck, once we've added this network destination, that we want to use it. So it's a two-part process. Just adding the network drive is not enough. I think Blackmagic is trying to move in a direction where we have a list of them available on the device and you choose which one that you want to use. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be working right now, so we're left with kind of this weird situation where you have to issue 2 commands in order to make all this complete from beginning to end. All right, so the next thing we want to do here is we want to say NAS select colon, and then hit enter, and then URL colon SMB colon / IP address 10.1.8.81 in my case / HyperDeck. Okay? Alright, so that'll be the command that we issue in order to tell it this is where I want to send the files right now, as opposed to another network location or an SD card or a USB drive or an SSD or whatever. So this is basically saying this is where to send the files for the next recording that I make. All right. And while we're in here, we can also add one more command here if we want to remove this configuration for whatever reason. You don't necessarily normally need to do this, but I'll just show you what it is just in case. So that's NAS remove colon, and then on a separate line URL colon, and then that same SMB line that we've been doing before as well. So just like so. Okay. All right, so those are really the only three commands that we need to send to the HyperDeck in order to make all of this happen. So the next thing we're going to need in order to make all this happen is we need to know the IP address of the HyperDeck that we want to communicate with. I've got 2 here. I'm only going to configure 1, so I'm going to turn this around and show you in the menu where we can find the IP address of the device. All right, so I'll flip this around this way, and then we're going to again want to go into the menu. So hit the menu button, and then we want to go over to the setup screen, and then hit set, and then scroll down. Scroll down, it's quite a ways down there. And you get to the section that's called Network. If your device is set to DHCP, then you'll see that address net below. So in my case, it's 10.1.8.154. We'll use that here in a moment. If you set your own static IP address, you'll see it in the same place, but you'll see that it says static IP instead of DHCP. Either way, just look at the line that says IP address, and you'll get the information you need. And we'll put that back on the desk, and then we'll jump back to the computer. The next thing that we want to do is we want to connect to the HyperDecks and issue these commands, which are going to tell it where to send these network recordings. And we're going to do that from Telnet. And you can either launch this from the Start Run dialog in Windows or Terminal in Mac. In this demo, I'm going to be doing it here with the command prompt that I've been using all along. So with that, I'm going to go, and I've got the command prompt up here. And so what I need to do from here is I need to Telnet, and I need to enter the IP address of the HyperDeck. And so in my case, that's going to be 10.1.8.154, and then a space, and then 9993. So what this is telling is I want to connect to the HyperDeck on on IP address 10.1.8.154 and port 9993. That 9993 is always going to be the same for all HyperDecks, and so you can just type that directly. You don't have to go digging to find that anywhere. Okay. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and now we are connected to the HyperDeck and it's ready to accept commands. From this point, we're going to want to go back to that Notepad window that we set up earlier. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to highlight this first section of commands. the first 4 in this case, and I'm going to right click and say copy. And then we're going to come over to the Telnet window, and then I'm going to, in the case of Windows, I'm going to right click and that will automatically paste. And then I'm going to hit enter one more time in order to finalize that command, and it says OK. So in that case, it has accepted the command, it recognizes that we've formatted it correctly, and has recorded that information for us. So with that, we've stored the location into the device, but we need to tell it to use that network location, and so that's where the second command that we have in here comes into play. So I'm going to go ahead and select those, and I'm going to right click and say copy, same thing, and then come back over here into the Telnet window, and I'm going to right click to paste. That's just the way it works in the command prompt. And so I'm going to hit enter, in this case a couple of times, one to end that second command, and then the second one on the blank line in order to finalize the command and tell it to go ahead and issue, in order to process the command that I just entered. And in response, I get that 200 OK message. And so at this point, I know that the HyperDeck is now pointing its recording to that network location. And with that, all I should have to do is press the record button on there. Do this upside down. There we go. So I hit record, and it seems to be working right. So what I'm going to do here at this point is I'm going to go back into that folder that I created a moment ago, and I'm going to double click on that, and bingo, sure enough, we're getting files in there. So as it's recording, those files are going directly into that folder. I don't have to copy them from anywhere else. And if somebody needs to edit, the files are right there available for doing editing right away. I would mention that it's probably not a great idea to edit while the file is open. And so you want to make sure that you want to close that file in order to make sure that it's not locked and in use by the HyperDeck at the same time you're trying to edit with it. And one thing you can do in order to force that, if I don't have any other recording media, and so no SD cards, no SSDs, no USB-C drives, what I can do is I can press and hold the record button. And there we go. And that starts creating another file seamlessly. So no breaks and no drop frames, audio is seamless without clicks or drops or anything like that, going in from one file to the next. So for example, you're recording a business conference and they've got individual speakers, and you want to break those up into individual files so you can get those out for editing very quickly. Just press and hold that record button for a couple of seconds. And that will end the previous file and start a new file right away. So anyway, that's essentially it. I will mention that the same folder that we've got here can be used for playback, and so if I was to actually go do this upside down, hit stop, and then hit play, it's going to pull those files from the network. There we go. You can see that on the screen. It's actually playing that file from the network location directly, and I don't have to copy that to an SD card or whatever. There are some limitations to the way this is currently set up. As mentioned, you can only have one network location configured in the HyperDeck at a time, and so if you've got multiple different places that you're wanting to record to, it can be kind of a hassle. You're going to want to save these commands that you need to send via the Telnet in order to reconfigure that and change that every single time. So that's going to about do it. If you have any questions about how to do this, you got some issues in getting it set up, you can certainly ask those in the comment section down below. But an even better option is to go over to my Discord server, and the link for that is popping up there on your screen. The big community of people who are video professionals know a lot about this stuff, and very often very eager to help. And so it's a great resource if you have trouble getting any of this set up. I imagine there will be discussions there on how to get this working on Mac and Linux and some others as well, and to kind of troubleshoot some of the other issues that come up, such as firewalls and whatnot. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I try to do video production-related content around once a week or so, although with what I have going on, other aspects of my life, that isn't always possible. So, but I do my best. But anyway, so yeah, there it is. Okay, I think that's about it. So thanks everybody for watching, and have a fantastic day.